Hi, everybody. Can you guys see and hear me okay? Hello. Hi, Preston. Hi, Xavier. Hi, Kim. Hi, Mateo and Aaron and Joy of the Lord and Cecilia. Hi, Rachel and Jermaine. Hello, guys. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Hi, Kim. So nice to see you guys. There's some new faces in here as well, so welcome. If you haven't been in a live webinar yet, we have like such a beautiful, supportive community in here. So it's a great space to share and chat and connect. Hi, Jamie. Hi, Tony. So I am super, hi, Zooms. I am super excited about the topic for tonight. This is something that I think is a hugely underrated topic. When I did the poll on Facebook and saw that this was the second highest desired course from everybody, I was so excited because this is kind of stuff that I would say this is probably one of my favorite topics to talk about, because a lot of forgiveness was a huge part of my own journey. And I just think that really releasing what we hold on to so tight sometimes can be such a powerful shift that we don't even realize, how much power is in there until we have the opportunity to release some of the things we hold on to from the past. So I'm really excited. I'm going to try not to talk about this and go off on too many tangents because there's so much to say. Nathan, hey. So Nathan, was part of our community in Toronto when I first started doing all these live talks years ago, and still with us as a community member of the school. It's so nice to see you in here. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Aaron. Yeah, first time I'm saying anything. Okay. Well, I'm glad you're here and you're used to it. I'm so glad you're talking with us tonight. That's wonderful. It's like outside of your comfort zone, right? You're growing. Hi, Kelly. Nice to see you. Inner child work nonstop. Yeah, it's amazing. Amazing. Okay, so I'm going to dive in. Miss you too. It's so nice to see you. So I'm going to dive into this and I'm going to go through a few really core components. This is going to be our next month's course. So I bumped it way to the top. So for June, just because this was requested so much, I'm basically going to do the courses other than what I had already written in order of the request you guys put in the Facebook group. Hi, Destiny. Hey, Annette. So I'm going to talk a lot about this. If we have time at the end, I've basically caught up on most of the Members Lounge questions, except for a couple from yesterday. So I might go and answer. If anybody's watching this back, waiting for those questions, I think it's 2 people. If I don't answer it here, I'm going to answer it tonight in the lounge anyways, when this is all over. So I also might, depending on how much, there's a lot I want to get out in this conversation today. And depending on how much we get through, I'm going to keep this webinar going until we're through the content because it's really important. So first and foremost, and this is going to be sort of the theme of the webinar itself, we can't forgive completely if we still feel victimized by the situation. So we might, there's an intellectual forgiveness and then there's the emotional in your body, you feel forgiveness. And the intellectual forgiveness is usually a bit of a form of repression, if I'm being really honest. Where I've seen a lot of people be like, yeah, I can't control it, so I just forgive it. Or, they're really sour or hurt about something still, and they're like, it's fine, I forgave. And sometimes people even can act sort of righteous about it, like, oh, I forgive, it's fine. And I just want you guys to tune in to if you're carrying anything, what type of forgiveness do you have? And there's nothing wrong with having that type of forgiveness. It doesn't make you wrong. You're doing your best. But there's so much in the world that I think isn't taught about how to forgive effectively and how to actually feel it in your body and how to really work through it at its core. And it's in doing that we get this opportunity to really, really grow in ourselves. So the ego mind likes to hang on to things. It really likes, part of our identity, right, is keeping ourselves safe. And so there's all these different reasons for which we won't forgive, things like we don't trust ourselves maybe to not, repeat a pattern that could lead to the situation happening again. And so we're afraid that, hey, if we let go of our anger or frustration or resentment, we're just going to enter back into the situation. And if that's the case, in that example specifically, what that's telling you about yourself is that, hey, it's really important that you work on setting boundaries and work on self-trust and all these different things, so you don't have to hold on to all that pain. So there's a quote from Nelson Mandela. I know this is like a very well-known quote, but he talks about how basically holding on to resentment or grudges is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And there's this line I read in a book once that said, whatever happens through you happens to you first. And it didn't say exactly that. I kind of paraphrased it now to make more sense, but it was so beautiful. And it's like, I realized that, hey, at a neurochemical level, that's even true. Like anything we're holding on to in terms of resentment, anger, we're first suffering from that. If we have that grudge towards somebody and it's happening through us towards somebody, that anger towards somebody, we are first suffering from our own anger. And that's impacting us in terms of our cortisol levels, in terms of our norepinephrine levels, in terms of like dopamine levels that can be going on for too long, that can sort of short circuit us or put us in our sympathetic nervous system for too long, and we can become out of balance. These things can like really deeply impact our health. And if we don't work on letting go of some of these things and really seeing like what is still living inside of us in terms of resentment or frustration or pain, usually what happens is we store all this stuff subconsciously. It's kind of all bubbling beneath the surface, taking up real estate in our brain to a certain degree. And then we get into all these habits and coping mechanisms to avoid the feelings inside of us that we don't want to look at or deal with or work through. And this can manifest as like, being on the hamster wheel 100 hours of the week and never like taking the time to self-reflect and look at yourself. And it's like you're running away from something, and it's really just these unresolved parts of you that you're carrying at the subconscious level. Or it can look like having a really painful coping mechanism, like drinking all the time, or substance use, or not connecting to people, out of fear that they're going to hurt you again. It can be so many different things. And so I think a really good place to start in terms of this webinar specifically, so that we see it and we sort of build this like emotionally based why we should forgive others, why we should work on this, is to look at what not forgiving is currently costing you. And just take a moment. And, if you guys have a pen and paper, and I highly suggest as we dive into this today that you come here sort of with like a topic that you're ready to work on specifically. So I would advise like, pick somebody who you want to forgive, pick a relationship that you need to work on and you sort of have in your mind, at the forefront of your mind. And then I would be like, okay, in this situation, what does it cost me to not work on forgiveness? And a way that you can tell if you have forgiveness work to do, or if there's something you're not forgiving currently, is you'll know that this is the case because if you were to make a list of people, and I think I mentioned this in a recent webinar, but if you were to make a list of people and be like, parents, children, siblings, partners, current, maybe not current partners, but for some people, yes, a partner, exes, friends, cousins, whoever else in your family. If you make a list of all these people and you just feel, you just look at a name one by one and feel what comes up for you, you'll be able to tell the difference if you're pretty in touch with your feelings at this point between people you feel positive and warm towards, like somebody you just appreciate so much, versus somebody that you're holding on to some stuff, because you might see their name and be like, oh, that's nice, but you won't feel like that emotional connection to the person. So you can sort of go through and do like a checklist and see, who have I fully forgiven? Where am I in a good space with everybody? And is there anybody that I'm currently sort of carrying resentment towards or around? And how is that showing up? So I just want to say hi Shannon. So nice to see you. Hi, Princess Khan. How are you? How are you doing with the breakup situation? I hope you're taking care of yourself and staying self-connected. And Shannon, thank you so much for your really sweet comment on YouTube today. I'm going to respond to it later this evening. I saw it when I was walking my dog earlier. So thank you. This is my big one. I didn't know how to set the boundaries, so resentment did the job. Yeah, we use resentment a lot of the time, or grudges, as a subconscious strategy to protect us, right? And that's not bad, but it just means that strategy has a lot of drawbacks, right? That strategy can come with a lot of downsides. And so that's what we really want to work on. what you are not forgiving in your life is currently costing you. Yeah. Thank you. It used to cost me my peace of mind and my ability to be present in the moment. Yes, absolutely. That's really beautiful, Cecilia. And so good, Princess Khan. I'm so glad to hear that. So it's so important to be able to, amazing, but working on my anxious side, great work. I'm so happy to hear. Aw, thank you, Shannon. I cut people out when I feel hurt very easily, and it costs me vulnerability and closeness to people. That's so insightful and a beautiful share. That was like a really heartfelt, vulnerable share. Yes, we will talk about forgiveness of ourselves. Absolutely. So there's a few points in here, but I have a lot to say about that topic just on itself. So I'm going to write it in here. So we talk about it in greater detail. So pick somebody in your mind or pick a situation or an experience and try to think of like what you're not forgiving. So remember, I always say, like, in order to solve a problem, you first want to be able to isolate that problem as effectively as possible. So you can even write out like a few things that you're holding on to for multiple people if you want to, but I would really try to, because this will be like sort of an interactive webinar, get as intentional as possible as how you want to use the content for today. And then I want you to ask yourself a certain set of questions, okay? I want you to ask yourself, if you're not forgiving a person or a situation, what about you? Like, let's say it's a person and you feel resentful or frustrated. What in you still feels that way and why? And what do you need in order to equilibrate it? Because here's the next really interesting thing about forgiveness, okay? A point that I've noticed in time, and this is like a huge point for this evening, a point that I've noticed in time is that with so many different people, if somebody has taken more positive out of the situation or negative, or taken all the lessons away from the situation, all the growth, all the learning, done the letting go of what no longer serves, released the stories, if they have taken everything that is there for the taking, all the golden nuggets of healing that exist within painful situations, people truly forgive. They like emotionally forgive. So I'm going to give you a story to share this. So I was speaking to somebody once, and we'll call him Tom. And he was bullied a lot in school growing up. And he was like really bullied, like put in lockers. He like felt unsafe at school. And this, he said, happened from like really early grade school all the way through high school. Like basically his whole life was about like being bullied. And he said he felt terrified going to school. He would cry like all the time. People would write on him. Like it was he lived in a really tough neighborhood, and it just wasn't a very nice situation. And he said when he left high school, he decided to take a year off before university. And he was like, I am not going to let this happen to me again in my life. Like, I'm going to put a full stop to my life. I'm not going to even start looking for a career, anything else. And he made this vow to himself that he was going to learn how to work with people, and how to like make friends and connect and set boundaries and stand up for himself. And so he spent a year, I think it ended up being like 2 years maybe, but he spent a good chunk before he actually did anything next in his life. And he read books about people, and he learned about human behavior, and he learned about self-development, and he took self-defense classes, and he did all these things. And when he went to school and did work thereafter, the next chapter of his life was like him bonding with people, him making deep connections, having good relationships. And for him as well, because he had been through so much pain around people, they were really like authentic relationships. This person's a really good person. And they were really authentic relationships and really heartfelt and really grounded. And he went on to actually be in a similar field to myself. And he ended up being like, he's basically a coach, and he I won't give his identity away, but he's a well-known speaker and coach. And he looks back at that experience of being bullied and is like, that was so beautiful for me, because it forced me to dig deep inside of myself. And I'm not saying like that there's not so much pain on one side of the experience, but forgiveness, and what forgiveness truly requires, is being able to see all the pain, recognize it, validate it. Yes, I went through that. It was so hard. It was so painful. Be with your emotions, be present, and then be like, okay, and what do I need in order to equilibrate it? What do I need in order to come out on the other side? And if you are stuck, if you're still hanging on in any way, it's because you haven't taken all of the lessons, all of the growth, and the maximum potential out of the experience yet. It is still waiting for you. And so that's what I want you to look at when you're thinking of things that you're holding on to. It's like the ego mind, the belief patterns, your identity, your coping mechanisms are still clinging to this experience and seeing it from a one-sided perspective, because it might still be one-sided for you. It might have, this selective filter, or this like not mutually exclusive, this like exclusively negative side. And if that's the case, either you're perceiving it that way and you're not seeing what came out of it, and you haven't actually just gone back in there and seen and noticed these powerful lessons or learnings or things that came out of it, or there's still golden nuggets in there for you to go back in and retrieve. So does that make sense so far? Because this is sort of like the theme or the cornerstone it's sort of the cornerstone of what I want everybody to take away from this today. So I'm just going to check in on some of the comments in here. So are we supposed to forgive some things that don't deserve forgiveness? Okay, so this brings me to another, I'm glad you asked that question. This brings me to another really important topic. Forgiveness, and I know this is like maybe even sort of cliche, but really truly I can tell you guys with certainty, after doing so many work with so many people over the years, forgiveness is not the same as like not having boundaries. And forgiveness, if we do not forgive, this is what we do instead. We give real estate in our brain to other people from the past. Because imagine this. Imagine we go back to, let's call that person Tom. And let's say that we look at Tom's life and he's like, you know what? Those bullies don't deserve forgiveness. And from a purely like, were those people good people? Did he deserve to be written on? Did he deserve to be put in lockers? Did he deserve to have to go home every single day, or maybe not every day, but like 3-4 days a week crying as like a young man? Like, did he deserve to be like tortured by these kids? Absolutely not. Do those kids deserve forgiveness? It's hard to say, right? Like, okay. Personally, I actually believe that everybody deserves forgiveness, because I truly, truly believe and have seen enough times that like everybody's painful behavior, maybe to the exception of like actual psychopaths who like don't have the ability because of their brain structure to have like a complete conscience in certain ways, minus like people like that, 99.999% of people, they hurt other people because they are in pain. And because their brain is trying to equilibrate, or they have poor coping mechanisms, poor strategies as compensations or adaptations to painful experiences from the past. And if any of you guys have ever been in pain in your life and then made a mistake because you're in pain, or been rude to somebody because you're in pain, or been short, or, done the wrong thing because you were in pain, like everybody can relate to that. That's part of the human experience. And should people be like held and punished for that forever? No. And there's another beautiful quote that I love so much, and it says, it was actually just another random line in a book, but it stuck out to me so much. It said, "He who hates evil only creates another one." And it's sort of saying, like, if I'm hating something bad, if I put my energy towards that kid who bullied somebody and I just think that person's terrible, I just, like, a few things happen. I only put more evil and negativity into the world, number one, right? And number two, I give room in my brain to that person. That person years later, if I am still victimized by that past experience, if I'm still reliving it, if I'm still carrying it, if I'm still emotional around it, you know what happens? That situation makes me over-triggered in some other place in my life somewhere else, and it only further negatively impacts me. So if I'm Tom and I got bullied, what happens? I can tell you another example of a person who I worked with once, and they had to do this work in their late adult life. I think she was in her 50s or 60s, and she had been bullied. She hadn't done the work. She definitely hadn't forgiven. She was carrying a ton of resentment, and she had a really tough time and kept getting fired from workplaces because she was carrying so much defensiveness towards people that she would constantly like snap and overreact and be, had this really strong fight or flight response to overcompensate in that way for what she perceived. Like people would be like short with her, or a little bit cold, and she'd flip out, and she was always getting in trouble. And like the poor woman was just carrying all this pain from the past. So whatever we carry impacts us first and foremost. And we're accidentally still giving people from the past all this power to keep hurting us over and over again on autopilot. Like, Bob, who's now the bully as well, Bob, who bullied Tom years ago, still has power over Tom if Tom hasn't done the work and solved it and released it. And so we'll go through in this webinar actual steps for how to do that and like how to get to that point. But really, I can tell you, as cliche as this might sound, forgiveness is for you. And forgiveness doesn't mean like it's for you in your subconscious mind and not recreating patterns and not giving real estate in your brain to somebody else who literally doesn't deserve real estate in your brain. But forgiveness does not mean like letting the person back in your life. Once we do the forgiveness, we then define our boundaries right after. So we go from, okay, I'm going to forgive. I'll give you some steps to do that work here today. And in the course, you'll get like a much deeper dive into it, but I'll give you some really good high level steps to start off with. And then once you've got the steps, it's then, okay, now what are my boundaries with this person so that I feel healthy, so that I feel safe? And it might be what I call an absolute boundary, which is where you go, I forgive. I'm going to release my resentment. I'm going to do the work around it. And then I'm never going to speak to that person again. And that I don't want to give my emotional energy further to that person again. The only emotional energy I want to give to the person is to remove whatever I would be carrying if I didn't do forgiveness work. And so it's such a powerful question that you asked. And I've personally and seen so many people be there where it's like, no, the person doesn't deserve forgiveness, but we deserve to release. And that's like another sort of important message to take away from today. So thank you for asking that. So forgiveness is a very interesting topic to me. I think I intellectually force myself to forgive a lot, but want to feel that forgiveness at my core. Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll go through that here today, but you're exactly correct. And like so much on the right track is there's such a big difference between like feeling in your body and actually letting go versus that real forgiveness, versus that sort of intellectualized forgiveness, which usually is a bit of a form of emotional repression. So, Furia, hello, Furia. I can't believe forgiveness is a topic today. I just broke up with my boyfriend 2 days ago. I'm so sorry to hear that, but definitely a good thing to focus on. Absolutely. And good to have you here. So, I'm going to play catch up here for a moment on the questions. So Mateo says, I feel like I forgave my father, but he continues to do things that I have to try to forgive again and again. This is a great point. Is this normal, or am I missing something? So number one, this is normal. I see this a lot. And this brings us to and we'll go into this. This is like literally part of the theme for today, but it's like, what do we do when we're working to forgive somebody, but they keep repeating mistakes and having the same patterns? And what we do, just at a high level before we dive into it in a bit, is we focus our energy on like what we have to release, like what we're carrying from it. I want you to imagine that anything you're not forgiving is like a bag of rocks you're carrying on your back, and then you're going to go do life with that bag of rocks, right? So you want to look at like, what can I release? How can I put the bag of rocks down so that I'm not hurting from what somebody else is doing, right? Like our emotions are affecting us more than anybody else. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people carrying stuff for like 20 years ago. Let's say somebody's in their 30s and they're carrying stuff from high school, and they're so angry still, and they'll talk about the story and they'll be furious and infuriated, and you feel it. And then it's like, that person, let's say we'll call this person Eric. And let's say Eric's angry from 20 years ago, the way an old friend treated him in high school. And let's call his friend James. And he's like talking about James. And then you think of like, what's James doing right now? James is like doing life. Like James is probably sitting at his dinner table, eating some dinner and hanging out with his family. And then Eric's still sitting there like angry and thinking of James and feeding this thing. And it just, who's hurting, right? Like, James is fine. There's no energy he's giving to the situation, but Eric is the one to do the work. So it's like we really, number one, want to be able to put that stuff down. Number two, when people repeat mistakes, we have two duties to ourselves. Number one, speak up for ourselves in whatever form that takes and release the stories that accompany that. So for example, like if it's a boundary violation, like the person keeps getting angry at you for something or being rude in the way that they speak to you, you have to show up in every single moment and be like, sorry, that's not appropriate. The way you just spoke to me is not okay. And it requires setting a boundary and expressing your needs. And two, it's really defining what those boundaries are. Okay. So we will go through steps really specifically, but what are your boundaries for a person that keeps repeating mistakes? We always need stronger, more firm boundaries with the person that keeps repeating mistakes or keeps repeating hurt or pain. And we have to assess what those boundaries are at all the different levels. At the thought level, like how much are we going to allow ourselves to think about this person throughout the day or about the past? At the emotional level, like how much are we going to take on that person's emotions? Just because we forgive doesn't mean we have to turn around and be like, oh, that poor person, I feel guilty for them now, or I feel guilty for having boundaries. No way. Like you have to get really clear about that. And then any other boundaries that we need to set, physical boundaries, material boundaries, obviously depending on what the situation is. So great question. The hard part is to think of the pain as gifts. The resentment still shows me where I'm at. Yes. So it means that you haven't taken everything away yet from the situation. So exactly. So Cecilia is like, time to extract the golden nuggets. I'm going to give steps today that are going to help you to start extracting those things and finding where those lessons are and finding sort of what can come up for you in the situation. Okay. I want everybody to do something right now, if you can, and I'll give you a moment to do it. In the top, like right-hand corner of your paper, if you have a pen and paper with you, write out the top 5 things that matter to you and the top 1 or 2 things you appreciate the most about yourself. Okay, so for example, you might say emotional connection matters to me, growing matters to me. You might say my friend Bob matters to me. You might say, whatever, your children matter to you. Your job, if you love your job, matters to you. So put the top 5 things and then 2 qualities that you appreciate most about yourself. Okay, so that might be how honest you are. It could be how emotionally available you are, how deeply you connect to others, how strong you are in challenging times. Write those 2 things up there. Okay, so Debbie says, hi, Debbie. I have a narcissistic alcoholic father who's verbally and emotionally abusive. There are no golden nuggets. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple golden nuggets right now, okay? First of all, I'm going to tell you I hear you and I know how painful that can be, and I'm so sorry that was your experience. But what I see is that if there's still pain carrying towards it, there's still, even after, hopefully you're out of the household, hopefully you've moved on, like, you're not living with him or in a shared space with him all the time, and still he has some kind of power over you, right? He still has the power to hurt, or this pain that you're carrying. And so try to look at, when you write out those qualities, okay, anything that you're holding on to, like in Debbie's case, how did that person maybe impact the qualities about you that you like the most? So for example, I often see that children of narcissistic parents have a deep capacity to bond to others and a deep capacity to empathize with others, usually because they're conditioned to be hypervigilant and super connect and see other people. They're forced into it, but usually that's a quality that is really powerful and beautiful for them later. Usually when you look at the things that you care about the most in your life, usually children who come from that type of household as well, if I bet emotional connections of high importance to you, or maybe even growth is of high importance to you, and maybe you are emotionally growing, maybe you are emotionally aware, doing the work, learning about attachment styles, having the potential to like further impact your own relationships, your relationship to yourself in a much deeper and more profound way, because that pain pushed you in that direction. If we don't have pain, we just stay stagnant. And there's a lot of people who didn't have pain, or didn't have enough pain, and so they stay in sort of this space in the middle. And so look at it from the situation of like, what am I still holding on to? Okay. Were there any golden nuggets in my life that came out of this situation? How strong did I get in tough times when I grew up in that household? How much have I learned to like buckle down and persevere? Like, hey, if I can get through this, I can get through anything else tough in my life. How has that helped you to be more of a survivor? Like, look for everything you can look. And here's the way we can do this. So I was going to go into this a little bit later, but because this is coming up, we'll talk about this right now. Okay. So, and I want to be really clear. Okay. So hi, GGG. I was never raped. That's a tough gift. I've done this work with people who have been raped, and I'm not going to get into that in great detail here today, but I've done this a few times with people in those circumstances. And so notice this, okay? This is all I'm going to say about this in terms of rape. And I don't want to I hope that's okay with everybody that I talk about this a little bit. I won't go into too many details. I want you to notice that I'll tell you a specific story, okay? I was working with this woman once, and she was molested 4 times by 4 different people before she was a young adult. And then she was raped 2 different times in her early adolescence. And so in her basically late teens, early 20s. And she was paralyzed in fear, right? And one of the first things I noticed about her and her circumstance when she was paralyzed with fear is that the reason she was paralyzed with fear is because she was living she went through these experiences 6 times total, okay? But let's just pick one time. She was raped, let's say once, but she relived the experience and replayed it in her mind over and over and over and over again with no boundaries, without working through it, without questioning the story she gave to the experience or the trauma. And how trauma stores in our nervous system and how it gets ingrained into our subconscious is through 2 different ways. Way number 1, we store trauma in the meaning we give to it. So somebody who's raped, what are the pieces of meaning? I am powerless, I am weak, I am helpless. And the more we replay it, the more we reinforce it into our subconscious mind, because the subconscious gets reprogrammed through repetition plus emotion. So we get these things forced into our subconscious mind, and then they become a part of our identity. And the longer we make that a part of our identity, we're re-traumatizing ourselves over and over again. And so all the time she's replaying it, the brain very, very much struggles to tell the difference between what's real and what's imagined. And so when you replay these things and you hold on to them, and you don't change the meaning about yourself, you don't release these beliefs about yourself you've developed as a result of that experience, that I am weak, that I am helpless, that I am powerless in my life. The rape trauma it didn't end there. It was there, and then it went into how you hold yourself in all these different areas of your life. It turns into how you connect with other people and how much distance you need to keep. And you replay and replay, and you re-traumatize and re-traumatize. And so I just want to be really clear about this, okay? Because we can't do that. If you've been through a lot of pain, you can't afford to keep doing that to yourself. It's not fair. And the more pain you've been through, the more you have to address this work. And it takes a lot of bravery, and it takes a lot of courage, and it takes a lot of honesty in the relationship to yourself. But you don't have a choice. It's like saying somebody has cancer, it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to keep eating junk food, or I'm not going to take care of myself. The more pain you're in, the more distress your nervous system is in, your brain, the more of a duty you have to yourself in these moments and these experiences. So I really ask that everybody today, as we go through this and we go through these steps together, try to pause. And it's so easy to push into that story and be like, this person doesn't deserve to be forgiven. And it's easy to go, there's nothing to take away from it. There are no golden nuggets. But then we are still tormenting ourselves, right? And it doesn't mean that pain doesn't exist. I want to be really clear about this. I'm not asking any person to be like, oh, there wasn't pain. Of course there was pain. But there's pain, and then there's suffering too. And there was probably both originally. There was definitely both originally for most people who are holding on to anything. but we owe it to ourselves to release those chains that are still binding us to other people. And the closer we get to release looks exactly like this. The more we can bring negative and positive into balance. So the more we can take away. If there aren't things to take away yet, it means you haven't done the work around it yet, and that's okay. But it means, what can I start taking away from this experience to start equilibrating this and finding as close as possible lessons, learning, growth, opportunities on the other side, not the exclusively negative side, so that I can start equilibrating the memory. And when the brain returns to a state of homeostasis around the experience, that's when we get the emotional release that we feel at a body and nervous system level. So I'm going to ask everybody today to be as courageous as possible, as gentle towards yourself as possible, and to open yourself to try to look at what you can do with this experience. And this research is backed up very tremendously by any studies. If you look online or you want to do any of your own reading, I've done a lot of research around this specifically, and a few certifications in different trauma work things. But research and studies in post-traumatic growth show that what creates basically the number one factor creating post-traumatic growth is when people who go through trauma choose to try to take something away from it. So going back to that person I was mentioning earlier, who's now the speaker and author, my old client, and he was bullied, and he decided, I am not going to allow this to hurt me anymore. I'm going to do everything I can to take something away from it. And it won't be an overnight process per se, but it's something that we all owe in the relationship to ourselves if we've been through trauma. Okay. And that's when we need to take care of ourselves the most. So here's a first step. Okay. I want you to start by looking at the 7 areas of your life, and you can write them out. Okay. So you can write them maybe across your page or down your page, whatever's easiest. So they're career, financial, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and relationships. And relationships are going to include friends, family, romance. Okay. And then I want you to look and try to link, because of this experience, because of whatever I'm holding on to. Okay. How did that somehow help me to grow in any of these areas? What qualities did I develop because of this pain? What characteristics within me came out of this? Did I become extra strong, extra resilient? Did I become extra empathetic, extra supportive? And so look at the qualities, okay? Or look at how you grew from this experience and try to look across the 7 areas of life. So for example, you might go, okay, out of this, I became extra empathetic. Out of the trauma I went through in the past, I became extra empathetic. And as a result of that, as a result of becoming extra empathetic, I have these really great friendships here, and I've got a really deep connection in a romantic relationship here, or in a different family or relationship here, or whatever it might be. Okay. So try to look and go across all different types. I see a lot of people who go through a lot of pain and challenges build this really deep emotional bond to God or spirituality or things that help them create peace more deeply at a subconscious level. So it might be spiritual. It might be physical. You might have had a lot of trauma and then become really tough and strong and exercised a lot and try to empower yourself physically, or take really good care of your health, whatever it is. And so try to look across the 7 areas of life. And this might be because I can't tell you how important it is to do this thoroughly. This might be something that you pause and you really come back to and you sit in for like an hour, 45 minutes, and you really assess across all 7 areas these core questions. What did I learn? How did I grow? What was I forced to let go of that was no longer serving me in some kind of area of my life? Okay. And were there any lessons or benefits that came out of this experience for me, especially according to or in relationship to these qualities I value very much about myself, or the characteristics or things that are most important to me in my life? So for example, I remember doing this work with a woman once, and she was a nurse. And she loved her job and got so much out of being a nurse, and just felt so deeply, profoundly connected to the people and the work she was doing, and had such a deep desire to save and show up. And it was just very heart opening and heartwarming for her. She was an ER trauma nurse. And when we looked at her childhood, and I know this is like sort of a tough experience, but her childhood was, her mother passed away when she was, I think she was 5 or 6. And then her father had cancer 3 separate times before she was 18. He survived, but like imagine what happened. And as a result of that, she became super empathetic, super caring for other people. And she was so invested in her career as a nurse. It was so rewarding for her. And part of that came out of course, those experiences. How do we know? Because the brain is designed to equilibrate around trauma. So it will place extra value and extra emphasis on the things that are related to you actually coming back up and balancing out those painful things that happened in the first place. So for example, she felt helpless to save her family, right? To prevent sickness, to do all these things, and it created all this extra motivation for her in that space. And a lot of these things and decisions we make in our lives are very, very, very much related. Okay. And when we can zoom out of our story, we get so attached to our story of our pain, and it's okay. It's because we go through pain and because life is really hard sometimes. But when we can step out of it and try to see it from like a more whole perspective and really be brave and courageous enough to take a look, this is when we start being able to take those first steps. Okay. And then the number 2 part is as you go through all those different 7 areas of life and you look at how it relates to your favorite qualities about yourself and the things you value most in your life, and you look for how you grew, what you learned, what you were forced to let go of that no longer served, when you really do that work, the next question is, what can I still take away? Because if I'm still holding on, there's things that I still need to empower within me to be able to do the equilibration, right? If we're still in pain, it means that we haven't equilibrated yet. And I'm not going to get into details, but I can tell you as a human being myself, as somebody who went through, if we could say the things that were traumatic and like the checklist of the big traumas people go through, I probably went through like 90% of them in my own childhood. And it's definitely why I do the work that I do today. And I can tell you, like, it's in doing that work that you really, really get emotional release. And it's not easy work. And it requires like really taking a step back. And the ego mind, with all of its coping mechanisms, naturally resists this type of work. It gets stubborn around it or frustrated. Like, how could you possibly ask me to let go of my story? This was my life. I actually said that to somebody once. And it's when we can try to take things away, when we can step out of it, when we can try to look for how we learned, how we grew, what we can let go of, and we can empower ourselves around these things we're hanging on to. This is where the real transformation happens. Okay. So I am going to keep answering questions. I hope I'm not spieling too much. So, and these are just the very, very beginning steps. So I'm going to give you some more steps to do. So, and take your time. Like, if I'm going to keep answering questions, but if any of you guys are there, like writing away, take your time, do the work, sort of create some space for yourself. I know I'm learning lessons from this relationship, but still heartbroken. Oh, wow. And he just texted now. Yeah. And it's going to take some time. Do the How to Heal from a Breakup course. This is forgiveness. There's a whole bunch of added things that we'll talk about around healing from a breakup as well. So I would go in there. It'll be very, very helpful. Hi, Patricia. How are you? How are you doing in New York? Okay, so Mateo. Okay, good. I have Mateo's question. Let me see. So if I scroll past any questions, please just make sure you tag me in them so that I don't miss them. Hi, Rhea. So how many times do we forgive? We forgive until we feel some kind of peace within inside of ourselves. But again, there's a huge difference between forgiving and setting a boundary. Forgiving doesn't mean we become boundaryless. Forgiving means we change our stories around the situation, which we'll talk about in a second. It means we try to have all the takeaways and golden nuggets of learning and empowerment and growth we can out of the experience. And we do the work to be courageous and try to like release all these painfully stored one-sided perceptions we carry from the experience itself. And we do that work first. And then the very next thing we do, sitting in our home or wherever we're doing the work, is we're like, now what are the boundaries I need in relationship to this person? Are they absolute boundaries, as in like I can't trust this person to even be in my life at all? And if they are, that's so completely okay. That can be a really beautiful, powerful thing. Are they just really strong boundaries where I can only touch base with somebody, every so often? So we forgive in anywhere that a lack of forgiveness instead takes up emotional space in our brain. Okay. And remember, I really want to just highlight this again. And I don't mean to repeat myself, but just for anybody who maybe came in here a little bit later or anything like that, whatever we're not forgiving, we are storing subconsciously in the stories we tell about ourselves or other people. Like, for example, maybe you had a painful experience with a man growing up, and maybe you made that mean that all men can't be trusted. And that hurts. Like, what's worse in life? To go through your whole life carrying that belief and never opening yourself to a man or to a woman or to whoever, or to be very cautious at a physical level with anything that you do, and to be aware and protective with your boundaries and yourself, but to open yourself carefully and cautiously in a loving and healthy way to other people. And then let's say you do that, and let's say somebody does betray your trust at some point again. What hurts more? That, or going your whole life never even having the experience of opening your heart or loving fully in the first place? And I would say, I've asked this question to many people in workshops before, and everybody raises their hand and says it hurt worse to block an entire part of your life. And so we forgive wherever not forgiving is only hurting us the most. Okay. I think that it is some of our subconscious saying to us to stay away from that person who hurt me so we can't forgive and forget. Yes. And that is like this really big piece here that I want to highlight as well. And I think that is some of our subconscious thing. Yeah. And it's, if we're not forgiving, we also have to check in and be like, am I avoiding forgiveness because I don't trust myself to set boundaries? And if that's the case, it's such an important piece of feedback. I'm going to go through like all these steps in a little bit, so you'll see like the steps required in order to forgive, if that makes sense. So Erin says, I feel like I've forgiven my mother and sister, but people who act like they do, who act like they do or still have still trigger me and cause me to shut down. Not sure how to navigate that. Beautiful. So here is one of the next steps. Okay. And it's such a great share, Erin. So if remember how we were saying earlier that it's like we carry the wounds around that, right? So like, let's say in that really tough example with the woman who was raped, it's like, I'm helpless, I am powerless, I'm weak, right? So when we have a trauma, we give meaning to the experience. And just, I'm not saying this in a way to diminish like anybody's painful experiences at all, but I want you to notice something. Like, the past is not here, right? It's literally gone. So whatever happened, if somebody comes up and like smacks me in the face, right? The moment it happened, by the time I even registered, it's now the past, right? So how does it cause pain, minus obviously the physical pain of being smacked in the face? How does it cause emotional pain? It's because I give meaning to the situation, okay? And maybe I give the meaning that I am unsafe in the world. And then I hurt myself in that space, right? How, like, the person, I can give the meaning like, oh, I should be cautious of people who walk up to me like they're angry. I can give like a nice balanced meaning. I can learn something from the situation, whatever it might be. But it's when we give the really deep wound meanings that hurt us that we get really stuck. And the people and the places in our lives that we don't have forgiveness, you can count on the fact that you've given painful meaning to the situation. So here's a great way of asking yourself this, okay? So the next step that you want to look at is, what meaning did I give to myself about the situation that I'm not forgiving? So for example, let's say my mom and sister, let's say I'm you, let's say my mother and sister are judgmental, okay? And when people are judgmental, let's say I make it mean that I'm not good enough, or that I'm going to fail, or I'm going to be disconnected or abandoned, or, fill in the blanks, right? And you guys can all refer to like the core wounds worksheet in any of your, I think it's in almost every workbook. I try to put that there and get everybody into the habit of seeing that as much as possible. So look at like what you made the painful situation mean about you. And that's something you have to clean up. Okay. And when you start releasing these stories that you make a painful experience mean about yourself, that's a really big step of creating relief at the subconscious level. And what you can do a step further is like, let's say, and again, I don't want to get too into like gory experiences. When we do like more trauma stuff, which I'm happy to create courses around trauma because I've done a lot of work with trauma for a very long time. But and I don't mean, I hope this isn't like triggering or anything like that to talk about this, but like, let's, one example is when we were working with that woman who I was telling you about the experiences she went through, one of the big stories she carried is like, I am weak, I am powerless, I am helpless. And she had been raped. She had all these really painful things happen. And then she was a mother and she was like in PTSD 100%, living life. But when we looked and we were like, well, how are you strong? And it was like, well, I'm working. She wasn't super empowered in her career. She wasn't living the perfect life. She was in pain. But think of somebody carrying that degree of pain, still working full time and still being a mother. She had 2 kids. It's like, that's tremendous strength. That's extreme strength. Like to be able to go through that experience, get up, go through life, keep showing up, show up for your kids, be the best mother you can. Like it's extremely strong. And her noticing that was like a game, like just this, it rocked her because it was like, oh my God, I am strong. And so we have to look for the other side of the meaning we've given to these really painful experiences. And so going to sort of a lighter level here, let's say I made it mean I'm not good enough. If I had a mother and sister who were judgmental, then I have to see how I am good enough. Where am I good enough? Where do I show up in any of the 7 areas of life, and how I'm growing every day, and who I am as a person, my character, and really take a good hard look. And one of the places we get stuck here is we judge ourselves thinking that, we should have all of life mapped out right away. We think I should be good enough in every single one of the 7 areas of life, or we judge the things we don't value. Remember I said write those qualities in the beginning, the top part of your page, the things you value the most in your life or about yourself. Sometimes we go like this. Maybe you value spirituality, emotional connection, personal growth, these things so much. And then you're like, oh, well, I'm not good enough financially. Well, are you trying to be good enough financially? Do you care that much? Where are you good enough in the areas that you really value? Have you shown up really well in those areas? So sometimes we can get lost because we judge ourselves and put expectations on ourselves unrealistically to succeed in areas that we actually don't really deeply care about empowering just yet. And usually at different courses, different points throughout life, you'll care to empower these different areas because the brain naturally perceives a void, and then it naturally is designed to equilibrate that void. But that void has to be big enough in order for us to care, if that makes sense. And I can tell you guys, like any of you guys here are doing the work today, and the more you're learning, the more you're building the relationship to yourself, look at what the long-term benefits of you being in a space in your life where you're just opening your eyes to different things. You're learning about people or human behavior. Like, how does that serve you in terms of the things that you care about or value? And when you look at, and that's one example, right? But you can look at any other sort of area. Maybe you're working on your spiritual self. Maybe you're working on whatever it might be. Those things usually come from a decent amount of pain first. Those things that will help you navigate relationships long term and have a relationship to yourself and regulate your emotions and do all these different things. That didn't happen because life was perfect, right? That happened because you had enough pain that it forced you to move and to do something. And again, I'm not saying like we should, by the way, you don't have to go through pain in order to move or do something either, okay? You can be intentional and try to grab things away from it as much as possible as well. So the next step there is to find the meaning you gave to these painful situations in the past and try to work on seeing the other side and equilibrating that. And if you don't see enough, it just means you need strategies there instead. So it's like, then what can I do to empower myself further in this area? How can I grow in this area? Maybe you are feeling not good enough and it's about finances or something. Okay, then what strategies, what can I take away from this? How can I help myself and support myself so that I can equilibrate, so this thing still doesn't have to have power over me from the past? Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Okay, so the next thing I see, hold on. My cursor just skipped down a little bit. Please repeat the questions too fast. Okay, I will repeat the questions twice. from now on. I honestly might forget that in 5 minutes. I'm going to do my absolute best. Sorry, my cursor just skipped way down. Okay, I'm going to play catch up here. I did see one comment, and it just caught my eye as I was scrolling up. And the comment is from GGG, and it says, I think it can be dangerous to forgive an ex if you're not over him, as you'd be tempted to contact him, and in my case, I'm blocked. And so I just want to raise one really important thing here. Yeah, okay, good. So Annette sort of answered this, which is wonderful. And it's that this is what the brain does. Remember, the brain tries to like create boundaries by holding on to resentment or anger. But again, that's still hurting us first. So if you don't trust yourself, okay, and if you really think if I forgive, then I'm actually, and I'm going to still give you other steps to forgiveness, by the way. We're just partway through so far. So if you're still holding on, it's actually, that's at the root level. That's not a symptom of like that you shouldn't forgive. It's a symptom that you need work on your boundaries big time, because you don't trust yourself to be able to release the pain you're carrying inside about that person, and then still be able to hold your boundaries. So it means you need boundary work. So if you feel like I don't trust myself, if I forgive, I'm going to go back, then do this, okay? It just means your brain's not ready yet to trust itself enough to set boundaries. It means you need a little bit of reprogramming work there. So if that's the case, make a commitment to yourself. Hey, I'm going to work very hard on setting my boundaries, honoring my boundaries repeatedly enough that I build a trust. I rebuild self-trust in my ability to uphold my boundaries, okay? And you can do that by like setting boundaries ahead of time, clarifying what those boundaries are, writing out even 20 or 30 reasons why you should honor your boundaries so that you create that emotional imprint at the subconscious level for why it's important. And then once you've done all of that, then you can turn back and do that boundary work. And then when you feel like, okay, I trust myself enough now, then you can do the forgiveness release work. But we don't want to hold on to things. We want to clean our subconscious mind as much as possible, because otherwise traumas repeat themselves. So thank you for asking that, because it's just an important thing to reiterate. And if I'm sort of like repeating themes tonight, it's just because I really want these things to sink in, because they're powerful when we apply them. Okay, so next question. Hi, Xavier. How do you forgive emotionally abusive parents when they continue to abuse? I've tried to set boundaries, but can't cut contact completely. I'm aware that my mother is a narcissist due to her own childhood trauma, but she caused me so much pain and continues to do so even with low contact. Okay, so this is what that means, okay? And I've seen this many, many times. And I know when you're in the situation, you can be like, it's not possible to change. And I'm sorry you're going through that. It's not a fun experience. But what I want you to know is that I have seen many, many times people go through this, do the work, and then actually feel this relief around the situation, okay? And this is that you can start by asking yourself this question. You can go, what do I need to fix or heal within myself in order for two things to happen? Number one, me to be really clear about my boundaries and never let those go. And number two, in order to not feel triggered any longer when I do set my boundaries, because you're saying in your exact situation, you can't cut contact completely. And sometimes people are in those situations for certain reasons. And then we don't want to sell ourselves short. We want to be able to be like, okay, I need to show up and I need to do whatever work in myself so I no longer allow that person to have emotional control over my feelings. Think about it, right? And I'm going to put this really bluntly because I want you to hold yourself to this standard, because it'll be one of the best things you do for yourself in this situation. You came from a narcissistic household. Guarantee that your mother was extremely controlling, extremely. And she still has control over how you feel, even when you hardly speak to her, even with very low contact. No way. Why? Do not give that power, right? Refuse to give that power still to somebody over your feelings. How do you do it? Start out by writing all the things your mother made you feel about yourself. And then you want to work on those stories and breaking through those stories completely. Because again, remember that story of Tom? he had all this painful meaning. I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy of friendships. I'm disconnected. I'm disliked. I don't belong. I'm excluded. All this painful meaning. When he had enough friendship and deep connection in his life because he did that work and he equilibrated it, these things had no power over him anymore. And when he went back and reflected over this, right? He became amazing with people. He felt super empowered and safe. And then he could look at the past without an emotional connection to it because he isn't still feeling that way. So he can look at the past and be like, yeah, I went through that. It was crazy. It was a hard time. But he's not emotionally investing in it anymore because he's emotionally invested in the new version of himself, in his new stories, in his new life, and what he wanted to create instead for himself. So break through the stories and also anything that this person is still making you feel or holding on to. Ask yourself, what do I need to overcome these things? How can I support myself? What needs do I need to meet for myself? What work do I need to do? How do I need to think about the situation? What do I need to take away from the situation? Where do I need to empower any of the 7 areas of my life? Okay, in order to not be in a situation where my narcissistic mother has any control over my feelings anymore. And I promise you, it's possible. Okay? And so that's a standard we want to hold ourselves to in the situation. And again, I'm by no means saying like that's not excruciating and so difficult and so painful. But I am telling you, I've seen this firsthand so many times. It doesn't have to stay this way. Okay? And so again, go through the 7 areas of your life. Use the steps I'm going to give later on, but go through 7 areas of life. Look for any golden nuggets that you've already taken away. Look to empower any golden nuggets that you can. Okay? Take anything you can. And then you can do these next 2 things that we're talking about. Write out all the stories that all the meaning you gave, right? She's controlling. What do I make that mean about me? I'm helpless. She only gave me love in conditional ways, or at least the way she expressed very much gave me the messaging that it was only conditional. What did I make that mean about me? I'm unworthy of love, or I'm unlovable. Don't allow those things to be a part of what you believe about yourself any longer. It's not fair to you. And just like somebody who is physically sick needs to take extra good care of their health, any of us who are carrying emotional burdens need to take that much extra care of our emotional health. Okay? So that's your next step. And then the next step underneath that, okay, is to ask yourself, what painful unmet needs did I have from this person or situation? So for example, any of you who had a narcissistic parent, maybe you didn't have the need for consistency, for freedom, for love of, feeling loved without expectation or pressure or control. And what you want to do, and this is so important again, is you want to be able to take on the role like I become my own parent. And I'm going to start meeting those needs for myself in the relationship to myself. And I'm also going to seek out people in my life who treat me the opposite of that. And the more you do that and you create that balance and harmony and equilibration, the more empowered you are to move ahead. So I hope that makes sense as well. The more empowered you are to release. And these can be some of the most beautiful and empowering things we do in our lives, right? Like, think of, let's say I'm in your situation and let's say I made this mean I'm unworthy of love. How am I treating the relationship to myself? Usually the biggest wounds that we had from others, we are still reenacting over and over again on autopilot in the relationship to ourselves. Narcissistic parent, they put you under pressure all the time. How much pressure do you put yourself under on a day-to-day basis? How much do you control yourself on a day-to-day basis? Control everything you do, your environment, all these different things. Think of dismissive avoidance. Such a good example. They felt alone. They felt emotionally avoided, right? They were around people who were emotionally unavailable. How do they treat themselves? They avoid their own emotions all the time. They create this aloneness in the relationship to themselves. They don't reflect on the relationship to themselves much. They don't tune in, check in with their own feelings, listen to their feelings, or even feel their feelings. And it's a direct reflection of the way others treated them. We re-traumatize ourselves accordingly. And that's what we have to put an end to. And when we keep putting an end, just like Tom, to all those things, all those pain points, that's when we start to actually be able to look back. And again, we don't feel pain emotionally at that level anymore because we are not still emotionally invested in recreating those experiences. They're not still alive and well for us at the subconscious level. So again, I hope this is making sense because these are such important topics. So Jermaine, it's so good to see you. So Jermaine says, how can you distinguish between not liking someone and having resentment towards someone you do like? If we do the list and come across feeling not so warm towards somebody, can that also because we simply, this is a great question, because we simply don't like them? Or is disliking someone always an indication of inner work needed? Okay, so my honest answer is yes. It's always an indication of some kind of inner work needed. It could be even work on the relationship itself, like communicating a boundary or communicating a need or expressing yourself around something. So there's always some form of inner work needed, but we have the divine right as people to be able to go, let's say it's like somebody that you used to work with 3 years ago that you don't talk to anymore, and you hardly had a relationship with in the first place because you just saw them from time to time. You can look at like, what qualities or traits do I judge about them, and where do they show up in the relationship to myself, or what meaning did I give to the situation? But if it's taking up a very, very tiny amount of space in your brain, if it's not that relevant, you don't necessarily have to go work on all those different things. You can focus your energy and attention. I like to think of like emotional work as like a table, right? With your 4 legs. When you have the big things that you're really holding on to and that are really taking up real estate, when you knock out like 2 or 3 of the legs, the table, when you knock out 2 of the legs, the table can't stand any longer, right? It falls. And so I guess that would depend on what side. I guess if you knock them out equally. Anyways, I'm overanalyzing. But if you knock out enough of the legs, the table falls. And that kind of has the same impact. So I would always investigate, quite honestly. I'd be like, if there's something I feel like a push away, what is it? What am I judging? What am I holding on to? What needs are unmet? What stories am I telling around the person or about myself relative to the person? What am I not understanding? This is our next step of forgiveness. If it's forgiveness work, where am I seeing things? And I'm going to go into this in a moment in more detail, but where am I seeing things just from my perspective and not putting myself in their shoes and going, okay, if I were them with their painful childhood, or maybe they have a bunch of kids, or they've got all these demands on their life, the demands on their life, or whatever it is, how am I not seeing or understanding that person? And what do I think the sponsoring intention is behind their actions? I'm going to go into this in a lot more detail in a moment. But it's a wonderful question. I hope that makes sense so far at a high level. So let's see. And yeah. So yeah, beautiful. This is so beautiful. You guys are saying really wonderful thing. Of course, both of my qualities are related to my childhood, my messed up childhood. So true though. Children of a narcissist here. Exactly. And I'm a codependent. And so that means when you break codependency and heal that as a byproduct, and you can do the work there, and you're showing up here and you're sharing, and so you're doing beautiful work already. As a byproduct, you will carry less resentment towards your mother because the imprints she gave you aren't running your life anymore. Like, do you guys see this? The past is not here. So if the past is not here, how does it exist? It exists through the imprints that are currently alive at the subconscious level in our mind. And the more imprints that are still currently alive and well in our mind from painful experiences from other people, the more anger or resentment we're going to feel towards those other people, which means it's a beautiful, powerful feedback mechanism that, hey, if I still feel anger, there's still stuff I have to work on within myself to free myself of those chains from the past, the bondage from what those imprints that I have. So you'll see, like, you start breaking down the codependency, you start having good boundaries in your relationships, you start speaking up, you start growing and expanding yourself in all these different areas, and you're slowly going to edge up and start creating more equilibration. And there will be other things in there to work on, of course, and then you get the benefits from it, which are, because there nothing is one-sided, and I can go into a whole bunch of reasons behind that, but actually I'll give you a quick synopsis. Nothing is one-sided because everything is truly, at its core, quite neutral in nature. And the most obvious, some of you have heard me mention this before, but the most obvious demonstration of this okay, is that everything emotional, let me be very clear and specific, everything emotionally based is neutral in nature. There's a tribe called the Satia tribe. It's Satiyaa. You guys can look it up. And I saw an interview years ago. It was this documentary, and this woman was being interviewed, and it was they're part of their tribe, and they truly, according to their beliefs, believe that this is the underworld, this is like hell, and it's a painful place, and there's suffering, right? And they believe that when people die, it actually is a sign of, like, you did your work, you're released, you're free from hell, you get to move on. And so they believe it's a sign of, like, being able to, they think it's a sign of, like, grace, beauty, accomplishment, essentially. And so when people are born or pregnant, they have grieving ceremonies, like funerals for birth. And when people die, they have these celebrations, like these real, like, parties. And in this documentary, this woman was very close to her mother, and her mother just died. And they're doing this, like, dance and celebration in the background, and they have a translator, and she's sitting there interviewing this woman whose mother died. And, like, you see really true, pure joy in this woman's eyes. She's, like, so happy that her mother died. And death, which is such a painful, emotionally taboo thing, it's like what we believe and the meaning we give creates such an emotional impact and output. And I'm not sitting here saying, like, any of you guys are necessarily going to be able to, like, take only all these, like, optimal, beautiful things away from painful experiences. That's not the point. The point is to take as much away as possible so that you begin to close the gap. You release those painfully stored beliefs. You meet the needs that are not being met. You start equilibrating that way, and you empower yourself in all those different 7 areas of life, as well as recognize the lessons, the growth, the learning opportunities that came out of it. So I hope that is still making sense. So let me touch back in here. I just want to say, I'm so sorry if anyone here has experienced this type of trauma. It's not your fault. It's not who you are. That's so beautiful. So Rachel says, can you suggest any books or research sources for this? Yes. Dr. John Demartini. I read The Body Keeps a Score, and that seems right up the alley. Yes. The Breakthrough Experience, Dr. John Demartini. That is going to be about this specifically. And he's got amazing work on it. So Annette says, I have known people who almost enjoy being in the pain of repetitive, painful thoughts, like pleasure and a victim mentality. I'm guessing there isn't much we can do for them. Well, what it is it's a subconscious comfort zone. You can't look at anything. You're raising such an important point. It's true. I've actually lived there myself for, like, a good part of my early life, where, like, I felt like they gave me, like, power or meaning or significance. The things I went through, the painful things I went through, nobody would understand. They haven't been through as much pain as me. Like, I kind of carried this as, I hope I'm not oversharing, but I can seriously relate because I've seriously lived that. And I know people are like, oh, I can't see that at all, but I did. And then I did the work, and I really do not live like that anymore. And it's extremely, extremely freeing. And, you know, there's lots of things I could have felt entitled about. So here's what happens, though. There's nothing that we do that doesn't have a hidden benefit to some part of us at a subconscious level. Everything we do is a subconscious strategy to get a specific need met. So it could be that it gives you significance. It could be that it gives you power. It could be that you're afraid to let go because you're afraid that you won't protect yourself enough. It could be that you don't want to look at those things. You feel like it's not justified. Going back to some of the things we talked about earlier, like you're afraid that you don't trust yourself to set boundaries for yourself around the circumstance or situation, etc. So it's a really important thing to take note of from that perspective. And so I guess there isn't much we can do for them until they make the decision to break free. And my mom falls into this category, and I feel like her attachment to the identity is too strong. It's so true. I mean, basically, I think what happens is somebody needs to see the cost of holding on. Because the brain is so wired to avoid pain and seek pleasure, if somebody can see the cost of what it's actually causing them to hold on and to keep staying addicted to those, like, painful patterns, and if they can see that there's a different way to get that need met for significance, for empowerment, for protection, for anything that your brain might be doing by staying there, then people are motivated to change. But I also want to say, just for you specifically, make sure you don't take on the role of like, I have to fix my mom, right? Make sure you're good with your boundaries. You might ask her that question. What does it cost you to hold on to that? Or is there a different way to get, what need do you get met through holding on to that? And is there a different way of getting the need met? You can like touch on it if you want to gently, but just be careful you don't then get pulled in and then you're trying to fix and save her and then you feel disappointed if you couldn't or anything like that. Just be gentle to yourself in the meantime, if that makes sense. Yes. So that's exactly, and Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about this too, how people get addicted to the neurochemistry of traumatic experiences. When you keep replaying patterns to a certain degree, right? Dopamine is a very addictive neurochemical. You get dopamine releases, norepinephrine releases, cortisol even to a certain degree, and the body becomes addicted to this and can keep replaying this cycle at the same time. And also, subconscious comfort zone. The ego mind is not interested in giving up its identity because it feels like death. It feels like a loss of a sense of self. And so when we've had these experiences and then we repeat them in a patterned way, they get programmed into our sense of self, who we are. And then we see the world through that lens and filter. And it feels very unsafe to let go of who we are and who we've become patterned to be at the subconscious level. And so there's all these different reasons, right? It's often a lot of things that we're afraid of letting go of, or because we associate letting go as a lack of safety. And so you can check in there as well. I started doing daily practice of writing fears and release through meditation. I can add this with it and meditate a bit longer. That's beautiful, Ruby. And it's so wonderful to see you here. I hope you're doing well. You always share such wise and insightful things online. So let's see. So Rachel says, how do we know when we've successfully cleared out a traumatic experience and fully forgiven and released it from our nervous system specifically? Beautiful question. You will know because you actually feel a sense of gratitude for what you went through. Not happiness, not positivity, not, oh my gosh, yay, I'm so happy I went through that. Gratitude. I see how this experience propelled me to a different place in my life. I see how I took things away from it that empowered me as a human being. I have deeper understanding. And you will feel just a sense of not warmth, gratitude. That's all I can say towards the experience. I actually did a trauma work certification around this. And that was what was taught was like, when somebody says they can see how they could be grateful for this experience, that's when you know that they've released it. That's when you know they're cleared. And so, yeah, beautiful learning. Debbie says, holy cow, I got more from your answers than 25 years of therapy. I'm so happy to hear that. And these are just, I don't know, I value, thank you for sharing that. I'm so grateful to be able to share this because I've felt a lot of the challenges myself. Thank you guys. The spiels. I don't know what the word is. I have a tattoo that says, trust no man. Do you know? Oh my gosh. Sometimes I have to be mindful just as a human being, because sometimes I see you guys all the time and I think about you guys all the time and I read the different things on Facebook and in the forum, and I personally feel like emotional connection to everybody here. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I just want to share. And I have to be mindful that I'm, also staying in my role and not oversharing too much. And but I almost got a tattoo when I was 18 that said fight to survive. I think about that now. And I think that's so funny. I feel, love and cathartic sort of like connection to that self. But it's right. It's those things you go through. That you can think of like whatever is imprinted on your body has been so deeply imprinted on your subconscious mind. And that's like a powerful feedback mechanism of like, hey, make sure you do work in this area specifically, like make sure you show up for yourself in that area. Thank you for sharing that. I relate a lot to that. Okay. So let's see. Advice on this. Every time I forgive him, I want to reach out and write a loving email. I'm taking the breakup class, but so far it's just stirred up all the feelings. It's been a year and made me, hold on. Sorry. Just jumped down. Oh no. Hold on. Sorry. My cursor just jumped down. What if forgiven? Oh, hold on. Okay, so advice on this. Every time I forgive him, I want to reach out and write a loving email. I started to write an email today. It wasn't loving, just a closure email. Some apologies from me and asking him to understand why I was so upset. It helped me to write it. What if forgiving softens? So it sounds like you have needs in there that you're trying to get met. Whenever we're holding on to something, like you've been out of a relationship for a year and there's still feelings, what that means is that the imprints that happened as a result of those experiences are still alive, right? Like you don't know who he is right now. He could have changed a lot, not changed much at all, who knows? But it's that breakup happened a year ago. If it's still, and you know, depending on like the length and the investment and all these different things in the relationship, it can take time to heal, but you can really, if it stirs up and there's a lot of feelings, it means that those imprints are being stirred up, that there's these things have impacted you at the subconscious level. And so what I would highly recommend is being like, what needs am I trying to get met from writing a letter? It's not bad to write a letter as long as you have as long as the intentions are truly closure. And I think I kind of answered the question earlier by accident, but if you said, what if forgiving softens you to an ex and he wants nothing to do with you, so you're trying to harden your heart? It's not, I don't want to hold that boundary. He does. That's not my boundary. Yeah. So what I would say that's so important is, why am I still going back to this person? What needs am I trying to get met from this person that keep pulling me back? Okay. And how can I make sure, and you'll see this a little bit in the breakup course, how can I make sure I start meeting those needs more for myself in my life? So look at that first. Okay, because it means the brain always goes to its fastest programmed associations for getting its needs met. So if you had this really deep relationship, or you got a lot of needs met from a person, and you haven't filled that bucket back up over the past year with a new friend here and a new friend here and a deeper relationship to yourself, and you don't have to fill the bucket through this one person to the same degree, but through many different people, through yourself, through a social environment, through friendships, family members, whatever it might be. If that bucket is still unmet, or is still not filled, your brain's going to be like, fill the bucket, fill the bucket, fill the bucket. It's going to be doing that to you all day long. And it's going to go back to whatever conditioned associations you have there that were automatic and easy. And that's probably going to be the ex. So make sure that whatever needs you have that are unmet, you can find ways to go back in there and get them met now. Okay. And check, like, what in me keeps getting pulled back there? What am I hoping? What do I wish was the optimal situation right now? And why? What needs would I be getting met from it? And then what are strategies to get those needs met in my life now? Okay. And then the next thing is, what painful stories am I still carrying about myself that make me think that I need him to fill that void? And work on changing those stories. Okay. And then if one of the needs is just closure, like I heard understanding in here was really important to you, you can write that and send it. If you don't trust yourself enough, if you reach out to not try to like rekindle the relationship, then wait, okay? Or then right at the end, please do not reach out to me back. I do not want to communicate. I just needed you to understand this, right? So you have a hard boundary that you set that way. But that means you also have work to do around setting boundaries for yourself in your life as well, okay? Like, why should I know you say it's his boundary, but I should have that boundary for myself. Why? Because I don't want to chase after somebody who's not willing to put in the work back, right? I don't want to chase after somebody or be available to somebody who isn't going to show up, because you just deserve more as a human being. And so put that there for yourself that way, okay? And so that's your why for your boundary, and why you should have a boundary in that space as well, okay? Oh, that's beautiful. I'm a writer by profession. It's very therapeutic. That's so nice. So let's see. You guys are so sweet. I'm like scrolling down. I can just see how supportive everybody is. Did Tom replace Bob? Bob, where do we say Bob? Bob was the bully. It makes sense because Bob's been through a lot. I think I tried to give the person a different name because I knew the person who was Tom, and I didn't want to, I think I felt badly calling that person Bob. He deserved a little more than that. Okay, so can someone tell me the 7 areas of life again? Yes. Oh, you're so sweet. Hi, Jordan. Jordan put them out. Beautiful. Physical, social, finance, and relationships as well. relationships. And I put relationships into 3 categories. I should almost call them the 10 areas of life because I always explain it at the end anyways, but relationships are friends, family, romantic. I hope that makes sense. Do you believe it's accurate to say that people can't make us feel anything? Rather, they evoke feelings that already exist within ourselves. Yes. And I know this is such a hard one to accept. Physically, people can make us feel something because they can come up and smack us, right? But that hurt us physically, right? But I can tell you an example of this. And I've said this before a long, long time ago, and some of you will remember this. Imagine that I come up to you, Rachel, and I say, you're a purple monster, you're a purple monster, you're a purple monster. And I just keep saying it. It doesn't matter how many times I call you that. There's never going to be a point in you where you're like, oh my God, she called me a purple monster. It's so painful. Unless you have like really painful conditioned associations about a purple monster. But you're just going to, at some point, if somebody says that to you over and over again, you're going to be like, what is wrong with that person? Like, why do they keep doing that or saying that? And it's because, exactly like you're saying, people can't make you feel things. People can only trigger conditioned associations you already have. Okay? So it's like people can't reject you. They can just touch on things that are living inside of you. Or if you, for example, were like, oh my gosh, she keeps calling me a purple monster, it must mean she doesn't like me. Then you just made it mean I am not liked. And then that created your own emotional experience. So I hope that makes sense. It's a great question. So Annette says, can you repeat? Sorry, I'm like a little behind because we keep talking about these different topics. Can you repeat the questions when to ask ourselves in situations we want to forgive? Okay. How did I grow? What did I learn? What was I forced to let go of that no longer served? And then what did I basically take away? You can think of it this way in its simplest form. What did I take away from the situation already that is linked to or related to the qualities I value about myself or the things I value most about my life? How did it imprint me? Because the brain wants homeostasis, you can bet in a lot of these different ways that whatever you value about your life actually came from some kind of void in the first place, right? Who values emotional connection a lot? Usually people who like had some positive associations, but then didn't have enough of it. And so their brain was like, oh my gosh, wired to seek pleasure, avoid pain. The pain of not feeling the emotional connection is intense. Then they had enough positive associations that their brain starts driving in that direction. And then they become great emotional connectors and they're emotionally available, or they have a great capacity to bond with others, or whatever else might be in there, right? So you can see that like there will be a natural equilibration that happens. And the more we can tune in there and see it, and then the more we can intentionally take more out of it, the more we heal that void and we get to have that experience of body forgiveness. So Xavier says, I'm working on negative core belief programming and see a big difference. I'm seeing golden nuggets as you speak. Thank you. PDS has been life-changing for me. Thank you so much for sharing that. Honestly, nothing makes me happier than like hearing that people are like understanding and getting relief, and it's just so nice. And it's because you guys are showing up, right? I can say anything in the world, but unless you guys take it and do the work and do the hard work, because it's not easy work, it's intense sometimes, then it doesn't mean anything. So thank you guys for showing up and doing the hard work and being here, because that's really what is happening at the end of the day, is you guys are doing that and getting the rewards accordingly. I'm currently physically sick by my codependency. I'm upset at myself for being unable to stop, losing rapid weight and stomach sickness 5 days now. Okay, so why? Here's a really good question for you, okay? First of all, I'm sorry that you're experiencing that. I would definitely work on the codependency course when you get a chance, but ask yourself this question. What in me still feels the need at a subconscious level to be codependent? What needs do I get met in a pleasureful way that I still have an investment in believing that codependency is pleasureful or positive? And what am I afraid, which needs am I afraid would not be met if I broke codependency? And you want to work on those beliefs in those areas. That's going to be your first step to removing that first layer so that you are then open and motivated to do the work. And if you want to create an emotional imprint to build your why a step further, you can be like, and what does codependency cost me? And what would my life, my relationships, all those needs I'm afraid of not having met, what would those all look like if I do work through codependency? Okay, I hope that's helpful. Wow, that's so interesting, Jermaine. So interesting. It makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways, right? The Buddhists talk about how that life is suffering. And I think as we clean our minds and do this stuff, then we can really release that suffering. But the mind is conditioned towards suffering, right? Because the brain makes negative associations about things more than positive and feeds them and focuses on them more for survival purposes. So our brain is conditioned towards looking that way, but we can do that reprogramming work. So, okay, I'm going to catch back up on the questions. Hi, Christy. So let me just see. I hope I'm not missing anything. I'm trying to scroll down to any tagged comments. If I see Cecilia. Trust no vinegar. That's so funny. Well, I saw the character on the back of a sriracha bottle. That's so funny. What a good story. It's good because you can laugh at it now, right? And it's a good sort of icebreaker to share with people. So what if someone calls me purple monster over and over again, and I have an association to that, but do have a pre-existing belief that I'm bad? Exactly. That I'm bad or something. But see how that's building in. So it's not the person calling you a purple monster that made you feel that way. It's that you co-created that experience because then you started building in those associations through the meaning you originally gave to it at some point in time. So it might have been neutral. And then at some point you're like, they must think I'm bad because a monster, maybe monster has like some kind of association for you as bad because people will be like, oh, that person's a monster, or like monsters historically on TV or like whatever programs we see as children are like scary, bad, evil things. But it's like if somebody calls you a water bottle over and over again, they're like, oh, you're a water bottle. Like it's it's like nothing, right? But at some point in time, you might give it meaning, and then the repetition reinforces that original meaning and then creates an emotional response. And then you've got repetition plus emotion that are then reinforcing and creating that belief pattern, if that makes sense, right? And yes, I just saw a comment saying, oh, wow, do you see that? So, oh, good for you, Tony. I can tell you're doing the work, Tony. Yeah, so GGG. So what you're saying is I'm very attached to my sadness. So I'm going to break this down for you if that's okay, because this is so powerful what you're saying. So I'm very attached to my sadness. When I think about my ex, it makes me feel alive. Okay. So number one, ask yourself this question. I am attached to my sadness. Why? What need does being attached to my sadness give to me? And there's something there. It might be significance. It might be, you said it makes me feel alive. It might be like uncertainty. It might be, emotional connection. Like the brain, remember, the brain gets its needs met in the present moment and also through fantasies of a potential future and old nostalgic memories from the past. So it could be that your brain goes, it's attached to your sadness because you're like, oh, you think about the ex and you bring up the stories, and then your brain gets some of its needs met by thinking of old memories. But then your brain very quickly, if you could slow your brain down in real time, then goes, oh, and this person's not here any longer. And then you give it painful meaning, like there's a loss when you've just had this connection. And then that produces a feeling of sadness, right? So ask yourself, why am I attached to my sadness? What needs does my sadness give to me? Okay. And then what's an updated strategy to get that need met? And then you said the next part, when I think about it, it makes me feel alive. Okay. So that's a really important thing too. That could be that you're trying to feel your feelings and feel more emotionally connected to yourself. And if it makes you feel alive, like you're feeling so much, that also could be a symptom that you're not allowing yourself to feel and process your feelings in real time a lot or enough. It could be that you're a little bit disconnected from some of your emotions. And so that creates more of an impact there. And then you said, makes me feel alive. And like, I am not 100% single. I have a love life, even if it's a heartbreak. Okay. So there you go. That's a really big, yeah. So there's a lot of story that I work with. Definitely do the emotional mastery and belief reprogramming course. It's going to go deep dive into a lot of this stuff as well, which I highly recommend. And so it's the story of I don't have about your future love life, right? How is holding on to your past love life in heartbreak actually preventing you from having a future love life? And maybe you can get some of your needs met by imagining and thinking about what you would want in a partner and how you want to show up in a relationship to a partner and what qualities you want to work on mastering and expanding within yourself to be ready for that perfect partner in your life. And if you put more of your energy into that, you can still get the needs met to have a love life, but it can be in something that's empowering and productive instead of disempowering and still chaining you to the past in that way. So I hope that makes sense. It's so interesting. I think my brain would latch onto the tone of voice, not the phrase itself. But the tone of voice is still you're still giving meaning to it. The brain is like an association making machine. So we've been conditioned to believe that a certain tone, like how many of you guys have been in an experience? I love this conversation, so I'm going to dive into it for a second. How many of you guys have had the experience where like somebody was cold and they were just cold because maybe they're a little bit dismissive avoidant. Maybe you had a teacher when you were a kid. I know this happened to me a few times because I was a sensitive kid, where I had a teacher who was like sharp, like just the way they talked was sharp. They weren't super warm. And so I would take that as like the tone and the sharpness, the bluntness was mean, and they didn't like me and all these different things. So we have conditioned responses to tone based on like relative to what we've been conditioned to know. So if you had a parent who had a warmer tone or were more emotionally expressive, and then you see somebody with a sharper tone, that juxtaposition is going to create the breeding grounds for your brain to give meaning and then reinforce the program, exactly like you're saying. So it's good to note, right? So being in my ego wanted to beautiful. Jermaine, you didn't give meaning to the situation. Okay, so I'm going to answer this last question, and I'm going to go into the last steps here that are important to note and to go through. So Cecilia says, I've learned that it was a reflection of me and not of men. Aw, that was really sweet. That's really sweet, and that was a powerful statement. For me, it is huge to be heard, seen, understood. Exactly. You guys are so wonderful and like kind to each other and just thoughtful. It's really nice to see. So, okay. So I'm going to go through the last sort of points here. So, okay. So we can't forgive when we haven't equilibrated fully. And we can equilibrate fully through first doing inventory and noticing, okay, what have I learned? What am I forced to let go of? How did I grow? What qualities or traits did I develop in myself that I really value? Or what things about my life did I focus on, really value? And how are those things linked to these painful experiences? Okay. So you can do inventory. And then if you feel like that only took you up a little bit, it means there's more golden nuggets to go in and find. And so you can ask yourself, how would I need to show up in this situation in order to feel like I've equilibrated this? Okay. To feel like I can take, what do I need to still take away? What do I need to still empower? What lessons do I still need to learn? How do I still need to grow to help myself move back towards that equilibration? And so those will be really important things to do. And then you can go in and you can be like, okay, what painful meaning did I give to the situation? How have I taken these imprints and replayed them? And what needs did I leave unmet in the situation? And how have I maybe been re-traumatizing myself? And you want to do deep work on both of those things, the belief reprogramming at the wound level or the thought reprogramming. And then create intentional strategies to break that cycle of reinforcing and recreating those unmet needs in your life and the relationship to yourself. Okay. And then if we're holding on to the person, okay, resentment is a lack of communication. Resentment is first unmet needs and then the lack of communication. So if it's in the relationship to somebody and it's like something you want to work on, then you want to be able to go, okay, what needs do I need to communicate to somebody else? And you may not need to communicate anything to anybody else. It might just be to yourself, right? You might go through those other parts and be like, oh, there's nothing left. And that's beautiful, right? So is there anything you do need to communicate? A boundary? I was speaking to somebody not that long ago, and they were talking about how in their life and in their experiences, they would still get really mad when they felt taken advantage of. And so I was like, okay, well, where are you still taking advantage of yourself in your life? Like, where are you not trusting yourself to not people please still? And this person had done a lot of work and they were doing fantastic, but she was like, oh, I still have things to work out here. And then when she will work out those things, what you'll see is that as she works out those nuances and trusts herself to set better boundaries, even at those little detailed nuanced levels with different people in her life, her colleagues, her coworkers, these different people, that's when it's like, oh, okay, I'm not carrying emotional pain there anymore. That pain is there to as a feedback mechanism to let you know something, right? So so that's your next step. Check in. Do you have anything to communicate? Your next step, these are just this doesn't have to be like step by step. These are things you can focus on, okay? If you want to do really deep forgiveness work, you can do all of these steps, honestly, and you can come back and like replay the video. Your next big piece, okay, is to question the next big piece before you do that is to set your boundaries, to check in with your boundaries. You know, why am I still holding on to this? Am I not showing up for my boundaries enough in some form? Okay. And if that's the case, where do I need to set boundaries? It might be around the taking advantage stuff. It could be around something totally different. So just check in. Okay. The next piece, question your shoulds or shouldn'ts. This is a thing that the ego mind loves to do. The mind loves to do this, okay? The mind is inherently narcissistic a little bit. And I don't mean like narcissistic personality disorder. I mean that it's self-oriented, right? From a survival perspective, that's the way that we're conditioned. That's the way that we operate. We see things from our filter first. We become defensive out of self-protection. We make decisions based on self-preservation, etc. So the mind loves to play this game, and this game sucks. This game hurts. It loves to do two things. It loves to war with reality. Okay. In the words of Byron Katie, it loves to fight against reality. So it likes to go back to an experience that happened and be like, that shouldn't have happened. And you can't say that. We can't do that to ourselves. It's like, oh, it shouldn't be raining. It's like, who's going to lose when you tell the story that it shouldn't be raining? You will always lose because you cannot control the weather. And so you're creating your own suffering out of nothing. And you only hurt. The weather doesn't hurt. Nobody else hurts. You just created your own suffering on autopilot. So we want to iron out those kinks, right? It's like saying when we do this, and it's kind of like humorous to a certain degree, and everybody's been there. I've been there too. You know, when we go, it shouldn't be raining, we're saying like, I should be God and everything should be going exactly according to my expectations. And when it doesn't, I'm angry. And it's a little narcissistic, right? The moment any of us do that, we had like a little, and I'm not saying in like that means you have NPD or anything like that at all. It's just that's the narcissism of the human condition when we do things like this. And so we also like to go, that person should have never said that thing to me. If it happened, the past is the past. There's nothing you are going to be able to do to control it. You can only control how you choose to perceive it and the way you choose to position it in your mind and how that impacts you emotionally. And what you choose to take away from it too, or what boundaries you choose to set around it, but you can't go back and change the experience. And it's only that little narcissistic part of us that wants to. It's like, I should be God. Things should be going my way at all times. And we only hurt ourselves in doing that, okay? So the forgiveness of ourselves that we were talking about, it looks like this. It looks like diving into the meaning we gave to a situation from our perspective, right? About ourselves. I'm not good enough because that happened. I wasn't loved. And working through those things, okay? And showing up for ourselves in that way. And it also requires these next two parts after you've questioned your shoulds. It requires looking at your side, okay? What, from my perspective, did I judge about myself that I need to instead create understanding around? Okay. So look at it this way. And I talk about this a little bit in the guilt and shame course. It's like you have to go back and let's say somebody was rude to you and you were really rude back. Okay. You said something mean that you wish you didn't. You have to actually honor your experience. Why did I react that way? Why did I say something mean? And I say this, I've said this a few times before, but it's another really key theme and message I want to push in the school here. And it's that when we have self-judgment, it takes us a step further away from healing. Then we get lost in the story of what we should or shouldn't do and the story of how we're this or we're that. What we need to do is replace that self-judgment with self-inquiry, trying to understand so that we're not trying to like self-judge and outwill ourselves out of something because that's a useless fight. Well, it's not going to do anything beneficial. What we want to do is we want to be able to go underneath and be like, what is the root of what created that response within me? And what does that tell me about myself at a root, at a subconscious level that needs healing or needs to be addressed? I saw somebody one time tell me a story about how they really reacted meanly to a bank teller. And this person was a sweet man, a kind man. And he reacted really to a bank teller who kind of made like a not so great comment, but it was kind of passive aggressive and low level. And he got really reactive. And then he was guilting and judging and shaming himself. And when we looked at his reactivity, it was that he had all these pain points around passive aggression from childhood. And passive aggression was from his mother, and it made him feel unworthy of her love. And so when this woman was passive aggressive to him, he had that wound triggered of being unworthy of love. And he's not going to solve that problem by being like, I'm a bad person for reacting the way I did. He's going to solve that problem by having compassion to himself and offering understanding and inquiry to himself to go to the root of the problem and work on it there. Don't repress the symptoms or judge the symptoms. Work on the deeper levels and the root. Okay. So it's another really, really important piece in there. Okay. And then the other component is we want to then extend that to somebody else. And if you don't trust yourself to set boundaries, you don't have to do this thing. But what you can do is ask yourself why that person might have done what they did. Okay. If I can tell you one thing, if somebody is truly happy and truly at peace, like a monk or somebody who's done a ton of work on themselves, or somebody who, is sort of in like a more enlightened space, or this like, profound, like healed space, if somebody's truly happy and fulfilled, they're probably not doing too many awful things to other human beings. Pain causes pain. Pain spreads pain. Fear spreads fear. So it doesn't mean we have to be like, oh, that's great, I'm just going to let this person back into my life. Try to look for the sponsoring intention for why somebody did what they did. Why do you do this? Because it depersonalizes it from you. If somebody comes up to me and yells at me and I'm like, oh my gosh, that person's a jerk or whatever. So let's say somebody comes up to me and yells at me on the street or something. If I do that, I'm just like putting myself further into the illusion of people are bad, people are this, people are that. I hurt myself. And then I probably give it some meaning about me. Oh, I'm not safe around people. The world's not a safe place. I am unsafe. Like, I hurt me. But if I can go, wow, that person must be in pain right now. Like, I know what it's like to be in pain. I get it. And maybe I need to set a boundary if I see that person again. Like, please don't ever speak to me that way again. It's absolutely not acceptable. Maybe I need to speak up for myself in a gentle way, whatever it might be. But if I give meaning and I don't look for the sponsoring intention like that, then all that happens is I just personalize it and I create my own pain. So looking for the sponsoring intention, trying to create understanding and find that understanding, even if it's just as simple as like, obviously that person's in pain right now. I know what that's like. I've been there. Even just something like that helps take the personalization out of it and stops it from imprinting your subconscious mind as deeply and profoundly. Okay. And the last thing you can sort of touch on is if you are still holding on to something, just ask yourself, what am I holding on to this for? How is it serving me at a subconscious level that's creating me holding on to it? It's the same thing. It's like, what needs am I getting met? We touched on this tonight, but it's just its own individual step. What needs do I get met by holding on to this at a subconscious level? And how can I empower those needs in a healthier way instead? Okay. And so those are the key components to forgiveness. And I know that this was a lot of info, but it's such important information. And it's so powerful when you really like use these steps and dive into this sort of moment by moment here. And so I hope that makes sense. Hi, Cheryl. I had a teacher like that too in 4th grade. I told my parents my teacher doesn't like me. Yeah, because it's so easy to personalize that stuff, right? And so it's like, then we give it meaning and then it hurts, right? And she was probably just like maybe grumpy or maybe raised in an emotionally unavailable household or whatever it might be. Thanks for sharing that. I have a memory of my kindergarten teacher asking if I had ants in my pants in front of the whole class because I was fidgety. Yeah, that's not fun. And then you make it mean something's wrong with you or something like that. Teachers should have some emotional training, in my opinion, too, because they have no idea how much they can impact kids. People can have like traumas from teachers. I've seen it many times. My third grade teacher yelled at me in front of everyone from crying. These are like these horrible teacher stories. I think, seriously, there should be a certain degree of emotional responsibility around teachers, which made me cry more, obviously. Exactly. Aw. Sorry to hear that. You guys are so sweet. And supportive to each other. It's taking forever to learn lessons learned from my ex. It's coming a little bit at a time. I even watched some tarot readings to give me insights. Amazing, using all sources. That's beautiful. I'm so serious. Every day I'm getting an insight, but it's a forever thing. And it's a journey for sure, which is beautiful. Okay, so those are all the main things for this evening. Thank you, Cecilia. That's wonderful. I'm glad you're getting a lot out of it. Yes, my dear GGG, you absolutely need to focus on you as well. It's actually keeping that pain alive. So the more you invest in that person and the more you keep it, you stay out of relationship to yourself, and the brain's like, how do I get my needs met for connection? The more out of relationship to ourselves we are, the more strongly we'll be pulled to connection outside of us. And then we get into a space where it's like we are trying to equilibrate that void, and we seek externally, but the more we seek externally, it's not met. And the more we're out of relationship to self, the bigger the void becomes, and the more pull, and it becomes its own vicious cycle. So thank you for sharing that. And it's so important for you to recognize that and to be able to break that pattern. And they told her, yeah, that's not good. I have to leave this great sharing night. Thank you, Kelly. Thanks for being here. Okay, so I am going to run. Thank you guys so much for being here this evening. And you get in a relationship to yourself by checking in with your emotions, doing daily journaling or meditation, doing daily self-work, self-reflecting. It's like, how would you want a friend to show up for you? You would want them to be able to go and sit down and be like present with you and listen to your feelings and ask how you're feeling and be respectful of your needs and meet them where they can. All the things you would want from somebody outside of you, you want to present in the relationship inside of you. And that's a powerful space to start. One day we'll hopefully do a meeting where everybody can come together, because that would be amazing. Thank you guys so much for being here. You're welcome. Thank you guys for your amazing questions, and thank you for being such a supportive community to one another. I can't thank you guys enough. What were we supposed to do with the list from the beginning of the webinar? Pick people that you want to work on that forgiveness with, and then all the steps that we just mentioned from like start to finish and summary at the end, all the way from like reflecting on the lessons, what you learned, let go of, no longer served, how it impacted you in linking to the things you value the most about yourself or in your life. And then all those preceding steps, the stories, the needs, the understanding and depersonalizing, all those things, plug those people or those circumstances you haven't forgiven into all of those steps. And you can focus on like 3 or 4 core ones if they're really profound. But if it's a big thing you want to focus on, then like somebody you really want to do the work on forgiving, then I would go through every single step. And you can just go back, and this is recorded, and it goes right in the tab in the members lounge. It goes into like the date. So it just says, it's not in the webinar library yet until the next Tuesday, and then it automatically bumps it. But it's right in the on the first tab. It says, let me tell you, actually, it says live webinar 0 out of 3, and it has the 3 dates, and you can click the drop down on the left side, and then it'll be right in there. Convention. We'll do it one day. It's on the goals and the list. Yeah, the 5. Exactly what Jermaine said. So thank you guys so much. Have an amazing evening. Thanks for being here so late with me and staying all the way to the end. And I will see you guys on Friday at 12 o'clock Eastern. Have a good evening. Bye.